I'm itching to hit something.
Yeah, can we go yet? Is it
Oh,
time?
I am fucking dead.
What is up, team? Killchain here, and this is your dedicated arms guide for Season 4 of Dragonflight, the final send-off before War Within. Let's get it! Talents. First of all, let's look at Mythic Plus. So you'll recognize this build if you've played arms at all, dabbling around in previous seasons. Very much tried and true arm setup. Not much has changed. Our tier set also reflects that, except for one minor change. We're yonking a point out of Bloodborne into Cleave due to the new tier set. Let's have a look. That particular tier set, 2-piece, is Mortal Strike and Cleave damage increased by 15%, thus the pivot to Cleave, and increases your crit chance with those abilities by 10%. Compounded even further with our 4-piece, whereby Mortal Strike, Cleave, and Execute crits will then give you a 8% damage amp for 6 seconds. So with that in mind, obviously, you should, for the most part, have a really high uptime on this particular buff that only lasts 6 seconds, because within 6 seconds, you're doing probably at least 2 or 3 of these particular abilities, and the likelihood that they're going to crit is all just beautifully compounded on each other. We already like crit as a stat. When it comes to the stats, so we'll obviously touch on that shortly. But as for the actual talent loadouts, the links will be down in the description below. But yeah, in terms of the change, literally it's just picking up Cleave, everything else as stock standard. Now, it is important to note on the class side, you are going to have to do some chopping and changing on preferences based on your group's needs for Mythic Plus if you need more stops and things like that. So most notably, the absolute most utility you can provide to a group is going to be pivoting down into Shockwave, and even potentially dipping out of Overwhelming Rage by 1 point to pick up the Fear if you really need to. That is going to impact things. Obviously, you don't necessarily have time to execute as much, but the crit strike chance is obviously going to be exceptionally useful here. Cool strikes would be the dream, but if you have a Demon Hunter and just a ridiculous amount of stops in your group, and you're kind of in a pug and everyone's just sort of having a good time and stuff like that, and you're not really too worried, then you can dip your 2 points into cool strikes. But this will be the most selfish build angle that you would go, and then that choice boils down to you guys, right? Whether you pull out your 2 points from critical strikes to go down into Shockwave and things like that. Now, let's talk about Raid. And this is absolutely super important. Nothing's changed. Literally exact same build you'll be running, same play style, test of might windows, and anger management synchronization of just spending all the rage all the time. And you just happen to be benefiting from the fact that your Mortal Strike is just going to be hitting even more Giga Dam. So the same stock standard build, which does obviously work quite well because we do get Sweeping Strikes baseline now, so you can afford to pick up probably Strength of Arms in most scenarios, but whenever you might have a Cleave situation, I totally just did Mythic cancel, so I had the Sweeping Strikes improvement there for a reason. But yeah, you can pivot in a couple of choice nodes here, most notably the improved Sweeping Strikes versus Strength of Arms, depending on whether it's a 2 Cleave fight, whatever the case may be. But everything else is the exact same. You're getting your Capstones of Fatality, Executionist Precision, Juggernaut, play style, just send all the rage, right? You're going to be doing Whirlwind and Thunderclap as your big damage amps to a big Test of Might buff. And that in turn just feeds your typical rhythm with Overpower and Mortal Strikes. Honestly, yeah, nothing to comment about this. It's just the same build. It's good. It's not intuitive, but it feels a lot more fun because of the tier set just amping up Mortal Strike so much. Now let's cover gear. We've already talked about the tier set because that was prudent to the talent side of things. Now, as for the actual gear, we cannot talk about anything without talking about Booleans first. So Booleans are the new system. Every week you do a raid boss that is awakened. You get this cute little particular item. Now these items, you get 1 a week, but for a cost of 2, so every 2 weeks consistently, you'll be able to get a free piece of any loot from the raid in question. So instead of waiting for RNG to bless you, you can get any loot from the raids, including the very rare trinkets and rings and all that good jazz as well, right? So with that in mind, you're obviously going to want to plan out your Boolean usage throughout the season. First priority is always going to be the weapon. Weapon damage is such a huge factor for any melee class that uses their weapon primarily as their source of damage, right? War is no exception here. So if you do have your legendary, definitely go pick up the Scale of Awakening for Firalath. Otherwise, for whatever reason, if you choose not to go for the legendary, you didn't get lucky enough, your bad luck protection hasn't started ramping quickly enough yet, whatever the case may be, if you need an alternative to the legendary, then Ash Candy will be your way to go from the Aberros vendor. Now, probably is important to note, the vendors themselves are in to the left of the engine of innovation, where we used to do the Spark Quest way back in Season 1. You've got your 3 vendors here, so Medrasil, Aberus, and Vault of the Incarnates. Now, yeah, by all means, weapon, definitely the way to go. The second expenditure, I would actually put it on the Diona's Ring. This bad boy comes from Aranog, so if you happen to, not a few guilds actually, we cleared Mythic, Aranog, and Council last week, and some of them have got it from their vault already, so it's definitely accessible in terms of getting a chance at it each time, but it is a very rare drop, so do consider that. And this would be my second purchase for sure. The damage amp that you're going to get as a warrior, the way we proc this particular fire damage to then proc more fire damage, even if you don't have Fearlath, which has fire damage in every global, basically, like the dot's going to spread like mad and it will tick fire damage constantly, so you're always going to be able to proc it. Even if you don't have this particular legendary, you'll be able to get it from your Helm enchant, which came from a Medrasil way back in the day, or if all else fails, you've got your Shadow Flame patch as well, the armor patch, that will proc fire damage for you, which triggers the rings. Now, once you've done this particular fire ring, so the one that procs additional fire damage, I wouldn't bother getting the shield one until you've touched on your trinkets. Now, outside of the raid trinkets that you can actually buy with bullions, the one to keep an eye on for is Algathar Puzzle Box. Otherwise, everything else you would need will come from the raid trinkets themselves. First of all, we have to talk passive trinkets. So every tier has always had this kind of really ultra popular strong passive trinket. Namesake of Season 1 was Whispering Incarnate icon. Of Season 2, it was the Ominous Chromatic Essence. And then lastly, in Season 3, it was Pips. So the most notable ones in terms of raw power strength, if you're getting its full benefit, definitely Icon and Ominous Chromatic Essence. In the absolute perfect scenario, you would actually have everyone running both, Warriors not included, right? So you get the full benefits of everything, and you're happening to get the DPS healer and DPS version, the tank healer and DPS version of Whispering Incarnate icon, as well as all 5 of the buffs available for Ominous Chromatic Essence. However, that's not really realistic, to the point where, especially because I'm more leaning towards Mythic Plus side of things as opposed to Raid, yeah, to be honest, I'm actually not going to be getting either of them. However, I will stress, if you're doing raiding of any content, or you've been able to plan a bit nicer with your regular Mythic Plus group, if you know a few of them are getting the Ominous Chromatic Essence, for example, you could pick it up and you can share your buffs there and stuff like that as well. So it is important to plan a little bit, but I'm going the safer route, whereby it doesn't matter whether I pug or go with the guildies, whatever the case may be. Puzzle box, exceptionally lucky. I got it from my vault first time on MythTrack, so that was absolutely wild. But pairing with that, I'm actually going to be running the Neltharian's Call to Chaos. Very strong, only because we've got Cleave back in our rotation in AoE now, so we've always got a consistent chance at proccing this bad boy. And yeah, it comes out, seems quite healthy in terms of value. But it will be behind if you could get Ominous Chromatic Essence and the Whispering Incarnate icon, for example, at its full capacity. It's just, I don't think that's going to be realistic, honestly. Beyond the 2 trinkets then, once you've kind of got that falling into place, then you would peel back to the Seal of Falafel, I don't know, whatever this fucking ring is. Which again, it's on its hyper extended item level track because it comes from one of the later bosses, and as such, just a really good stack state because it's one of the highest item level rings you can get anyway. But the proc obviously works with all your sources of fire damage I mentioned previously and gives you really healthy shield, especially given that we're going from Fury as our predominant warrior DPS spec and keys that had really good sustain, stacked versatility, and had like leech out the ass with Cold Steel Hot Blood and all that stuff, to now Arms, which is typically doesn't stack a lot of versatility and kind of struggles in that sense. This is a great ring, for example, that's going to help bridge that gap to make sure you're still sturdy and healthy enough compared to what we're used to with Fury. So very good ring to pick up after that. It is also important to note, especially going back to the Medrasil vendor, if you do tend to raid and want to make sure you've got decent prowess in single target and on, elongated raid encounters, right? You can't go past Signet Brand. It's absolutely meta. Was back in previous season, right? In Season 3. No changes here. Yeah, you definitely want to pick this up if ratings on your radar a lot for this particular Season 4. Now let's also quickly touch on gems and enchants and things like that. Honestly, outside of rings and the gems themselves, everything's quite static. So the same graceful avoidance on cloak and the devotion of avoidance on the wrist, waking stats on chest again, the belt class for your stamina on your belt, the fierce armor kit as usual on your legs, and Watcher's Loam on your boots. Now, some people prefer to go Planesrunner, but Warrior already has decent mobility in combat anyway, so yeah, don't need Planesrunner, and you can more than suffice with Watcher's Loam for a bit more sturdiness. Again, given that Arms is traditionally a bit more squishier than Fury, definitely well worth it. Now, when it comes to the ring enchants and gems itself, that's really down to that current sim situation. So raidbots.com, you've probably already all used it, and if not, definitely well worth getting, along with the Simulation Craft add-on, which allows you to /simc, get your big long string of info, copy and plug that into raidbots.com, and you'll sim your character. Now, typically speaking, crit will edge slightly out in terms of AoE, whereas haste is 100. Even though we're at diminishing returns, haste is just the bee's knees for single target. So if you are aiming more towards raid and pure single target aspect, the general consensus is going to be haste over crit. And then likewise on the flip side, if you're more in terms of Mythic Plus and AoE kind of setup that you want to slightly lean towards, then crit would be your best way to go. If you want a complete safe option, you can throw crit on your rings and then just have haste gem high and then haste crit gems, if you know what I mean. So that would be my recommendation for the gems and enchants and stuff. When it comes to the consumables, exact same concept, right? Nothing has changed. You want to be a bit more on the damage front, Corrupting Rage will be your best bet. However, I typically only recommend that when you're an alchemist. So that way the negative debuff that you get is diminished because alchemy gets the reduction there. Otherwise, tepid versatility, and even in Mythic Plus, especially high keys, tepid versatility for extra survivability. The only DPS pot being ultimate power, it's obvious and only choice, right? Howling Runes, so haste on your weapon is definitely the way to go there. You should already have your permanent augment rune. If you don't, then obviously you can just buy augment runes from the auction house or whatever, but well worth picking this up as well. It is a 100k investment, so if you haven't already got it, maybe not worth it for this season. Save your gold ready for the War Within, but again, and likewise stock up on your feast or personal food. Everything's pretty much across the board. It will be worthwhile picking up some Hush Zephyr as well, which is invis pots, as you start getting more and more involved in the Mythic Plus side of things. Occasionally someone somewhere, a tank, is going to want you guys to be able to do a skip or whatever. It's just nice and handy to have those invis pots there, just in case if your particular group happens to want to do a skip and you don't have that, it'll kind of screw you out of the situation there. And also, believe it or not, auto hammers you can get for repairing for everyone. They're actually relatively cheap, and anyone can buy these, so you don't need to be an engineer or a blacksmith or anything. You can just stock up on them. And yeah, allow everyone to repair, so well worth at least having a couple of them. The last thing you want to do is have a bit of a rough start to a dungeon or something. It's still timeable, but then everyone's durability is starting to get low, so that will be definitely well worth picking up as well. And lastly, we come down to the rotation. Now, this particular, Arms is obviously a lot more involved than Fury, right? So I'm going to do my best to kind of simplify it in terms of just getting you some decent solid foundation that you'll sort of learn to pick up from there, because the name of the game is all about rage expenditure. So you want to be dumping rage all the time to feed into your anger management playstyle. And especially if you're running single target, you'll be typically picking up Test of Might. So that doubles down on the whole rage economy back and forth, because you just want to be spending rage all the time in every capacity always. So in terms of AoE, so Mythic Plus is typically what I'm spending more of my time on these days. So from that side of things, you have your cooldowns. So you want to make sure you're casting Warbreaker with Bladestorm in AoE. So typically you're going to go in, you would make sure you get your bleed on with your Thunderclap. So bleed as many people as you can. Then you can open up with your Warbreaker, Avatar, and Thunderous Roar, and then straight into Bladestorm. So you want to have a Warbreaker with Bladestorm as the damage source when you're in AoE, but it does actually swap for single target. And likewise with Whirlwind, try and preface your Whirlwind to always be within that Warbreaker damage amp. And then outside of those particular wombo combo cooldowns, keep your sweeping strikes up in AoE because that'll cause double dipping on the overpower. So overpower will set out multiple shots forward, but thanks to Dreadnought. And overpower and Dreadnought specifically kind of do a lot of heavy lifting in the AoE. Like it's actually quite a large portion of your damage. So especially in AoE, you can afford to sort of neglect a little bit the Whirlwind side of things and just pump a lot of the Dreadnought overpowers. But anytime you do have Warbreaker up, then Whirlwind is definitely the way to go. But most of your rotation is just going to simply be fishing for cleave resets and pumping out your overpower in your general, but like moment-to-moment gameplay is the right word I was looking for. But when Warbreaker comes back up, thanks to angular management, happy days, pop that, make sure you Whirlwind within that thing, maintain your bleed, and then it's just literally sitting between that happy situation of overpower, cleave, overpower, cleave, overpower, cleave. And if you don't get resets for cleave, that's fine, just keep overpowering. And then only spend rage when you have no cleave or overpower to hit. And then even then try and preface your Whirlwind to only be in the Warbreaker window and only Thunderclap if there's nothing else to do, or to make sure you keep your rend up and not drop rend. Now, what you'll tend to notice, and one of the biggest kind of changes in terms of gameplay if you've typically done what I've done and played only Fury, is you're focusing on the rotation because obviously you're getting used to it and everything, but you need to keep an eye on as targets start dying, or if there's some really squishies that are just going to immediately die straight away. Because the moment you hit like 3 and less targets, especially 2-person cleave, your priority kind of tends to shift away from cleave and straight into mortal strike. Even though you might not necessarily be hitting all mobs, in terms of just raw throughput, it is better off to spend your sweeping strikes and your tactician stacks and all that stuff on funneling overpowers into mortal strike instead of cleave the moment you hit 3 and less. And especially when one of them non-priority target that's just sort of going to fall over in the next global cooldown anyway. So in that regard, it is important to kind of remember that switch. And given that situation, that is when your priority becomes less on just overpowering spam if it's there, and only dumping rage when it sort of seems reasonable to do so, and more about just dump all the rage. So that pivot between AoE and being heavy overpowers and less on rage expenditure slightly. Immediately, as soon as shit starts falling over and you've only got 2 to 3 targets, that's where your sweeping strikes goes into mortal strike, and the only thing you care about is dumping a lot of rage. But again, you got to take into consideration: is it Fort Week? Are these 2 priority mobs just going to live forever, or are they also sort of going to fall down? Do I want to save my Warbreaker for opening up on the next pack? That kind of thing. So there's definitely some thought process involved in it, but that's pretty much your rotation. Blow your cooldowns, make sure you always Warbreaker before Bladestorm, and then just overpower and cleaves all the time for AoE, and only Whirlwind in Warbreaker windows if you can afford it. Otherwise, on the flip side, 3 and less targets as soon as shit starts all falling over. Just mortal strikes at all times, dump your rage everywhere, and then overpower just as a filler. Now, when it comes to single target, so obviously we're going full raid mode. There is no in for the kill. You've swapped it out for the Test of Might, which even more puts heavy emphasis on just rage dumping all the time. That's where you truly stick to overpower as a filler, and you're really wanting to be dumping a lot of rage all the time. And this is also where your priority shift pivots as well. If you were on a single target boss, still running the Mythic Plus build, so this particular build where you're getting Bladestorm and stuff, you actually want to Bladestorm before you hit your Warbreaker. So Warbreaker suddenly becomes the last thing you do instead of the first thing you do. Because Thunderous Roar specifically, you actually don't care about the upfront damage. It's only 59k, whereas the bleed damage is what's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So for that reason, you can funnel that into before Warbreaker obviously hits. You hit your Hurricane stacks with the Bladestorm, open up with your Avatar and Thunderous Roar together, and then Warbreaker, so you get as much uptime on Warbreaker in your single target rotation. And that's why it pivots into the other way around, where Warbreaker is the last thing you do before you open up with Bladestorm to do the most AoE, right? So in terms of single target though, yep, happy days. We go in, we want to obviously get rend up as soon as possible. I'm exceptionally lazy. I just apply it with Thunderclap, even though Realistically speaking, you should be applying a normal rend instead of a thunderclap rend. At the start of the fight, you have a 30 rage rend to apply as opposed to a 40 rage thunderclap. So in terms of get rend up on the target ASAP, you should really be using real rend, not thunderclap. But like I said, I'm lazy. I'll just do that way. And then, your cooldowns are as normal, right? You obviously can hit your stuff with Colossus Smash, and then the name of the game purely becomes only overpower as a filler, and then dump all the rage everywhere all the time. So if there's nothing to do, then overpower by all means. But outside of Mortal Strike, you can afford to be hitting a lot of your whirlwinds and that kind of stuff as well. You'll definitely miss a few things, like I'm not perfect either, right? But you're fishing for Mortal Strikes at all times forever, especially in a raid environment where you want to build up a massive fatality hit when you hit execute phase. So whenever Mortal Strike's up, regardless of what your situation is, unless if you're in execute phase, then, which we'll talk about in a sec, you just want to be hitting Mortal Strike at all times forever. Outside of that, again, your sudden death used to be a big part of your priority in terms of the tier set and that as well. But because the tier set has changed, sudden death procs have gone to lower down the list, basically as a filler alongside with overpower, which is fine. But then you're whirlwinding on cooldown wherever you can, and thunderclapping as well for the rage expenditure, just because of this test of might and anger management loop. Now, when it comes to the execute phase, which thankfully this dummy has just gotten into, this is where, due to your executioner's precision, you want to pump in as much executes as you can, and then obviously keep your warbreaker up, hit your cooldowns as usual. But execute is your new filler now, basically. You're just dumping that at all times forever. If you don't have the rage economy to be able to just spam 3 executes in a row and then hit Mortal Strike, then you can do 2 for the full executioner's precision buff. And then in that last global cooldown before Mortal Strike comes back up, you hit overpower instead of a 3rd execute. The reason why you ideally want to hit executes for all 3 global cooldowns, if you've got the rage to do so, is because 1, Juggernaut stacks it up quicker and it ends up doing a lot of damage. 2, again, that rage expenditure is going to feed directly into test of might and anger management, and then you're still hitting decently hard with Mortal Strike. And although overpower also buffs Mortal Strike, and you can double dip and get 2 stacks of executioner's precision and 2 stacks of the overpower buff for Mortal Strike, that's still not best throughput situation, right? So you still ideally prefer to hit all 3 executes. Just keep in mind that it's oftentimes, especially things like Lust, don't line up with your execute phase and things like that. You just won't have enough rage to be able to afford to do 2 rounds of that, and then you're sort of sitting there going, I've got to hit something, and then you just overpower. So 2 executes overpower Mortal Strike, 2 executes overpower Mortal Strike if you don't have the rage. Otherwise, 3 executes Mortal Strike. 3 executes Mortal Strike is the best, perfect situation. And that's pretty much your execute phase. You're going to do absolute wicked damage. The amount of times I've been sort of 5th on the list, 4th on the list, then all of a sudden execute phase pops along, and then happy days, I end up topping out. Really, really fun, especially when you're carried heavy by your new 535 R level legendary, which I only just got last night thanks to the heroic raid. Very excited. But that's pretty much all the thing. I'll have graphics up on the screen as well as I've been talking about this. Hopefully that'll help in some capacity. I got the hiccup burps. This coffee is going right through me. Jesus Christ. Good coffee though. But apart from that, thanks very much for watching. Hopefully that gives you guys a nice leg up for Season 4. Just something fun to enjoy while we're waiting for the War Within. And we actually have some warrior updates on the War Within as well. So I think that's going to be a discussion video to bang out as well. Cheers.